Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Monroe County Memories. I'm Elizabeth Brandis, the director for the Monroe County Historical Society Museum. The museum is located at the corner of 6th and Washington Street and is free and open to the public. Our hours are from Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4 and Sundays from 1 to 4. Today's episode of Monroe County Memories is another in our series on oral histories. The project you'll be seeing today was created in conjunction with the Unitarian Universalist Church and is their example of their oral history project for their organization. The museum is pleased to be a part of this project. It was produced by Judy Hetrick in conjunction with the Indiana Heritage Research Grant Project. We hope that you learned something about creating your own oral histories from the example that the Unitarian Universalists have put together for us today. Thank you very much and see you at the museum.
Hello and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bloomington. I'm the Reverend Barbara Carlson. As our congregation nears our 50th anniversary in 1999, a number of our members have put together a history based on their memories. Leonard London was one of the small group involved in the founding years of the fellowship that led to our church.
Well, I actually am sailing under false colors and saying I was a founding father of the church. I was a founder in absentia because I was on sabbatical leave. The year was founded and my mother did it for me. She wanted something. We both felt the need of a group where people could come together and discuss matters of concern to liberal-minded people, could discuss ethical questions, could exchange views, and there was no place where you could do that. It was a desert from that point of view. So we considered that a Unitarian fellowship would be good. And there were others who felt the same. There were, of course, Ralph and Annetta Fuchs, who were the heart and soul of this group from the very beginning. And Ralph was involved in all kinds of activities from the very beginning. There was Stith Thompson in folklore, who liked very much to discuss philosophical, religious questions. Howard Mann of the law school, Austin Clifford of the law school, various others. So there were enough of them with Unitarian backgrounds, so someone, I'm not sure which it was probably the future, got the idea of forming a Unitarian fellowship. We met in one another's houses, and that was the time when I liked the group best, because it was an exchange of ideas among equals. No one was laying down the law.
Fondly remembered from that time are Ralph and Annetta Fuchs.
They were unique in the genuine sense of the word. They don't make them like that anymore, and they didn't make them like that before either. Quite different. Ralph, reserved and formal and polite, rarely displaying any passion in his manner at all. Annetta, warm, outgoing, loving. Ralph with an incredibly keen intellect and a commitment to justice everywhere. He did it on the national scale, working for the almost moribund American Association of University Professors, which had suffered cruelly from the McCarthy years. He brought it back nationally to its feet, establishing the Indiana branch of the American Civil Liberties Union at a time when a group such as the American Legion were attacking the ACLU as a communist front. Being very active in the NAACP here and on the state level. Let me see. Oh, that's only part of it. But
I also think that philosophy is highly important for a lawyer, and that I would strongly urge pre-law students to take serious courses in philosophy in order to get a concept of the different views of the universe and of man that can be formulated so that the lawyer will be conscious and thinking about the ultimate impact and ends of what he's doing.
They were the moving spirit behind the establishment of the fellowship and the church. And they were, if we were Catholics, they would be on the way to sainthood.
Bill Lynch recalled some other inspiring early members.
Another person who was a giant, from my point of view, was Stiff Thompson, who was the founder, really, of the field of folklore in this country, and created the first department of folklore here at Indiana University. And I remember, I think it was sometime in the 60s, he gave a sermon at the church on that was entitled something like the faith of a humanist, in which he traced his religious development from his boyhood as in a staunch Presbyterian family to becoming identifying himself as a humanist. And he articulated his humanist orientation so well, integrating it with his development of interest in folklore, and how he was able to mesh religious myth and folklore and see them for what they were, as human creations, which were very rich in meaning, but not an adequate basis for modern living. Another man who I admired a great deal was Russell Noyes, a member of the English department. And Russell Noyes was a gentle soul who had been an acquaintance of Robert Frost and other poets. In our meetings at the church, you could always count on Russell for coming out with a verse of Wordsworth or some other English poet that was appropriate to the occasion.
It took the work and love of many people to make that early Unitarian group grow and to nurture our children. Ray Murray and Elaine Leininger remember the early days of our religious education program.
Well, while I was still in the Memorial Union, I was a superintendent of the Sunday schools, and I really enjoyed that a lot, and I stayed with it pretty much for most of the early time. I remember one of the things that I was able to do for some of the children. I had access in the biology laboratory to an incubator, and every Easter I would set a few eggs up so that they would come out hatch just about the Sunday of Easter, and take them over and amuse the children in the Sunday school with these hatching Easter eggs.
And I can remember one thing in particular. I think it was Ray Murray who bought this marvelous cabinet in which we stored all of our materials from one Sunday to another. And that cabinet has a long history. That cabinet went with us wherever we went, and I dare say it's probably at the farmhouse to this day. And I remember Hazel Geiser particularly. She was teaching very young children, and she was such a wonderful, warm, gracious lady. And Hazel was marvelous. She started teaching these young children in the living rooms, and she always carried this marvelous rug with her. Wherever she went, she carried to teach. She carried her rug. And of course, this was for the little ones so that they could sit in their circle and be read to, or whatever she had planned. But it was Hazel and her rug that lots of kids can still relate to. That was just wonderful.
As the group grew, it relocated several times. The first two big moves are remembered by Cookie Lynch in a conversation with Joan Bennett, and by Elaine and Dick Leininger.
Well, once we decided we had to get out of the Memorial Union, and we also felt that we should tried to get Sunday school and adults meeting at the same time. This was not achieved in our first move. We realized we couldn't afford to do anything. Our budget, our yearly budget was $700.
Of course, times were different then too.
I remember the average pledge was 15 or something like that.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
So there was no way we could build anything, but we decided to rent a property on quite close to Indiana on 4th Street. I can't show it to you because it's now a parking lot. But it was one of those old houses with a big veranda and a roof that came over and was sort of ponderous and dark and gloomy. And it had been a student boarding house.
Oh,
so
sounds awful.
It had been ravished. I mean, it needed everything done to it before we could meet there. And people like Bob and Lenore Turner and Elaine Leininger and Ray Murray and a group of us really went in there and painted. I can remember the joys of painting radiators with aluminum paint.
Oh
myself.
dear.
And we had no heat, and we had only cold water, and it was winter, and we were trying to clean it up.
Then we moved to the house on 4th Street, which was the Greystone house.
And someone had the idea that it would be very nice to have a piano upstairs. And I think there were at least half a dozen of us who risked our lives and well-being to get that piano upstairs. It was an upright.
Betty Perry talked to Joan Bennett and recalled the problems of fitting into the spaces found.
We went to the house at the corner of Indiana and 9th, and we bought that house.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't really a good house to have we were growing, and so they had the church service at the Von Lee, and that was when I was in charge of the Sunday school. We were in the house on 9th Street, and we had a lot of children because ours were the children that all appeared after World War II. So we had about 125 children then.
Oh my goodness.
It was a big Sunday school.
Wow.
The Unitarian Universalist Church offers many different courses of study for children, teaching about other faiths, about Bible stories, and about their own church. One early set of lessons made a big impression.
Miracles abound. We had we gave out a leaflet that could be put in a loose leaf notebook. And in fact, my older daughter came back looking for these when she had children of her own.
Oh.
Well, it was crystals, and they pointed out salt was crystals, and then they studied snowflakes and all the different designs and so forth and so on.
Andrea Murray was one of the children in those early classes.
The Sunday school at the little Indiana Avenue house, we used to call it Rocks and Stars. That was what our sort of generic children's terminology for it. We did not study religion much until later, till we were 12 or 11, something like that. But Rocks and Stars, we studied geology, we studied plant life, we studied astronomy, rocks and stars, and we had great leaf collections and rock collections, and we learned songs about planting seeds and oats, peas, beans, and barley grow, and nobody knows how, but they do, and we had a great time at Sunday school.
It took hard work on the part of fellowship members to keep Sunday school and all the other activities going. Ray Murray remembers.
In those days, the organization was such that there were jobs for everybody, and there are a lot of jobs, and sometimes you find yourself doing difficulty hunting up somebody to do the job. Maybe the fact that I was president of the group for a year and then 2 or 3 years later, I had trouble finding somebody who would take it over, so I was president again. I mean, that sort of thing, how you have to depend upon people for all the jobs that get done, and that situation led to the desire on many people's part to become more thoroughly organized, and we had a meeting one night to decide whether we would call a person of, not exactly a minister, but somebody to be leading and take the step to go toward being a church. And that was a very tense vote, I remember. Came out to pretty close, but they voted to go on and call somebody for start of a ministry.
The group got help from the National Unitarian Association, and it got a temporary minister. Dorothy Vitaliano remembers those days.
Well, that came when we decided we might like to become a church, and the UUA, or at that point the AUA, American Unitarian Association, sent us a retired minister who went around sort of helping fellowships become churches. His name was Grant Butler. And he and his wife came here for about 3 months. And I can remember we sent out a letter explaining Unitarianism to every name in the phone book except those we knew, for ministers of some other church or something. And had a lot of people turn out for services in the Von Lee.
The final vote to become a church was in 1958. The night the official papers were signed was a memorable one for Elaine Leininger.
I remember the night that they were going to sign all the papers to become the church, and this was going to be at Ray Murray's house. And everybody was over there, and I didn't think that I was going to have too much to do with that, except they ran short of people, so I had to go sign the papers. But we had a horrendous rainstorm and lightning, and just in the midst of all this, lightning struck the house across the street. So all of our good soldiers of the Unitarians came and got the hoses and almost had the fire out by the time the fire engines arrived. So that was quite an auspicious beginning.
Unitarians were always active in community issues, as Bill Lynch discussed with Don Bennett.
By the late 50s, we were very acutely aware, well, even in the middle 50s, shortly after we arrived here, there were certain social issues that really gnawed at us in a conservative southern Indiana town where, when we arrived, the remnants of racial segregation were still very much in evidence. And
such as?
Well, that blacks couldn't go to a white barber shop, and there were certain restaurants that wouldn't feed blacks. And so the fact that there were members of the fellowship who were actively working to desegregate Bloomington and to achieve a community where there was racial justice meant a lot to us.
Members of our congregation helped to begin Planned Parenthood, the Community Mental Health Group, the Bloomington Developmental Learning Center, the Memorial Society, and other community organizations. We also started early to form groups within the church. One of the first was the Women's Alliance, which is still going strong today. Dorothy Vitaliano remembers its beginnings.
Well, it started with a small group of the women. I know Betty Perry and Lenore Turner and some of them. Our minister, by that time we had a minister, Paul Killinger, he wanted to go to some meeting. Of course, the budget couldn't handle that, and neither could he personally. So they said, well, let's have a little bazaar. Maybe we'll raise, he needed something like $600. And so they had this very impromptu little bazaar, and they raised so much more money than they expected. That he not only went to the meeting, but we had the nucleus of the alliance there.
As Cookie Lynch recalls, Paul Killinger, the first minister, is usually remembered more for his local community activities.
While Paul was here, we got into headlines. It was one of the few times when we got into headlines in the local paper, and it was on a discussion about Christmas carols. And this is the 1961, December 7th paper.
Right.
And Paul had raised the question about Christian hymns in school. And it was interpreted to mean that Unitarians were opposed to Christmas carols. So here they have this little gal singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" under the Christmas tree. And then we had a series of letters to the editor and articles saying that Unitarians were really okay about Christmas carols, and it's been sort of a big brouhaha.
In the mid-1960s, the church decided to buy the land we now occupy at Fee Lane and the Bypass. As Cookie Lynch told Joan Bennett, it was quite a find.
I wish people could still see it the way I see it in my mind's eye, my memory, because where the driveway is in front of the house was the main street. That was Fee Lane. And there was no state police, there was no stadium or field house or anything. There were just fields. Fields going down, and then the ridge at the other side of 37. No bypass, no nothing. And I thought, oh, what an absolutely wonderful place where this farmhouse is, if we just have a beautiful structure there. Someday maybe we will.
The land purchase came after Paul Killinger had moved on and David Johnson, a man deeply concerned with civil rights, had been hired as minister.
One of the high points in the history of our church was David Johnson's participation in the Selma March.
Exactly.
And I was either on the board or on the Social Action Committee, but at any rate, I was in the group that met at the Hattery's house to decide whether we could raise the money to send the minister to Selma. He had asked to go. And I had some lingering doubts. What if we send him to Selma and something happens to him? It really worried me. But he wanted to go, and so the group assembled said that we would raise the money for David and for anyone else who wanted to go.
David Johnson was followed by John Young, who was minister here during the 70s, and William Murray, who stayed from 1977 until 1980. Ann Kamen recalls our next two ministers, Laurel Hallman and Bruce Johnson.
The thing I remember most about Laurel Hallman was the effect that her sermons had on me. I was kind of afraid because I thought that she was following me around all week, and then on Sunday she would do this sermon after having witnessed my emotions or whatever it was I was going through. How does she know that I'm dealing with that right now? And I've since heard a couple of other people express that also. I think she just clinched on things that were so elemental in life that everybody thought that was their thing because it was just a basic part of life. I was scared a couple of times that she was following me. I'm a child of the television age, and I remember a sermon that Bruce Johnson did one time to my generation, because it was his generation too. He dressed up in a cardboard box that was a washing machine, cardboard box that some refrigerator had come in or something, and it had a hole cut out in it, and he was in there as if he were on television, and it was just hysterical. I laughed all the way through it, and he said things like, "But wait, that's not all," just like they do on TV. I don't remember very many sermons, but that one I remembered.
Still, it is the individual members coming together that make church. That unity with diversity was symbolized in 1991 in a very special project, as Tommy Owens recalls.
In recent years, I've taken up quilting, and right behind me is the church quilt, which has pieces from individual members, each of which has a little story connected to it. And I believe in the church library there is a book that tells all about all these pieces. This quilt was a cooperative effort between several members of the church, as well as those who contributed squares. And although I still consider myself a beginning quilter, somehow I ended up sort of, I don't know how to put it, in a leadership position on this quilt. And we're very proud of it. I remember the day that it was unveiled in church, and it was all rolled up on the floor. And at the end of a little play that the children did, this was raised, on pulleys, and we all got our first look at it, and it was such a thrill for everyone.
Church members have remained active in community issues. Leonard London, speaking in 1994, recalled our role in a recent controversy.
I was very proud last summer when there was a struggle in the community over gay rights and an all-night session of the city council, that this was one of the two churches in the city which sent representatives of the church pleading for an enlightened policy.
I am Dan Quilter. I'm on the board of directors of the Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm here representing the members. On May 16th, just a couple months ago, the full membership unanimously approved an official mission statement for the church. A document of 7 sections. The second section reads as follows. We, the members of the Bloomington Unitarian Universalist Church, do covenant to recognize and embrace human diversity, thereby affirming, defending, and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every individual. These words, I think, articulate clearly and firmly where members of our church stand. And I bring this message to you from the church.
The Unitarian Universalist group in Bloomington has grown and changed in its first half-century. We certainly don't all fit in someone's living room anymore. But the church is still a place for discussion of matters of concern to liberal-minded people, a place people can come together to discuss ethical questions and exchange views. Our ongoing activities range from coffee houses to choir performances, young adult and campus ministry, and meditation groups. Our Sunday services offer messages from our ministers and members of the congregation. Occasionally, we have distinguished guests. The most recent was Dr. Houston Smith, renowned author and scholar of world religions. Always we are nurturing that garden planted nearly 50 years ago, growing a liberal church community that offers spiritual growth and intellectual stimulation with a vibrant mix of people. We are an open, welcoming, and diverse community. Perhaps church historian Ledford Carter explained it best.
Once, about 20 years ago, I think it was, there was some discussion about whether our church should be a coldly intellectual church or a warm, affectionate type, I suppose, church. And so it was called, do you want it hot or cold? And when we were discussing it in church once, one young member says, well, I like my church like a fudge sundae. Something hot, something cold, and a few nuts sprinkled on to make it in.